7:31, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Will the town clerk read the call?
Notice of town meeting, Town of Windsor, December 10, 2019. A town meeting of the electors and citizens qualified to vote in town meetings of the Town of Windsor, Connecticut will be held at the Town Office Building at 50 Church Street in the Town of Windsor, Connecticut on Tuesday, December 10, 2019, commencing at 7:30 p.m. for the following purposes. 1. To introduce, discuss, and act upon a resolution to approve the acquisition of 43 Chestnut Street, Windsor, Connecticut, using grant funds that were awarded to the town through the Responsible Growth and Transit-Oriented Development Grant Program for the amount of $125,000 as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. 2. To introduce, discuss, and act upon a resolution to approve the acquisition of 45 Chestnut Street, Windsor, Connecticut, using grant funds that were awarded to the town through the Responsible Growth and Transit-Oriented Development Grant Program for the amount of $264,000 as recommended by the Board of Selectmen, dated at Windsor, Connecticut, the 2nd day of December 2019, signed by Selectman Kervick and Hill, and appeared in the Journal Inquirer on December 3rd, 2019.
You've heard the call. The floor is open for the nomination of a moderator. Is there a nomination?
Nominate Joe Calcetta.
Mr. Glazier nominates Joseph Calcetta. Is there a second? Seconded by Peter Lambert. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Thank you. Is there opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Welcome to tonight's town meeting, and it doesn't look like we have more than 150 people in here, so I don't think we're going to have to move tonight. We've all heard the call of tonight's meeting. Is there a resolution on the first item of tonight's agenda?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move for its adoption.
Thank you.
Be it resolved that the Town of Windsor, acting herein by town meeting, approves the acquisition of 43 Chestnut Street, Windsor, Connecticut, using grant funds that were awarded to the town through the Responsible Growth and Transit-Oriented Development Grant Program for the amount of $125,000 as recommended by the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mr. Town Clerk. You've heard the resolution. Is there a second?
I second.
Name, sir, and address.
Roy Zettlemoyer at 74 South Center Street.
Thank you very much. And just going forward, if you're going to make any comments tonight, please identify yourself along with your address going forward. Now, the rule is that the person making the motion has a chance to speak first.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Be as brief as possible. What I'd like to do is give a little bit of background on this project for those who are not intricately familiar with it. I've been living it for at least the last 3 years, so I may be a little bit more familiar, so I want to give you the sort of the thumbnail. This is the present condition of 246, 252, and 254 Main. Actually, it's 252 and 254. 246 is Mr. Brill's building, which will be just off to the left of this photo. In 2016, we applied for a grant through the state of Connecticut. It's called a Transit-Oriented Development Responsible Growth Grant. We were awarded $136,000 to do preliminary engineering and some preliminary property acquisitions. The subsequent year, we applied for a second grant in the amount of $1.8 million to follow up with some additional engineering work and the construction. We were awarded both grants, and that's what we're talking about tonight. So all of the funds, when I talk about any expenditure study, we're talking about expenditures of the $1.8 million that we've been approved, is the grant is set aside for us. The general idea of the project is to set up these 3 parcels, 1, 2, and 3, on Main Street by those addresses for redevelopment. And in order to do so, we need to stabilize the hillside. The Chestnut Street runs up this hill here, and the hillside is in pretty rough shape. You saw it from the previous photos. And so to stabilize the hillside and provide parking on the backside for tenants or residents of this property. The idea of this property, pursuant to we have Main Street relatively new Main Street overlay zone regulations that are, restrict the types of buildings that can be built there in certain styles. These are 3 privately owned lots. The idea is that we would have retail properties on the first floor facing Main Street. Parking for those would be provided by on-street parking. The upper floors, and we can go as high as 2 floors by our regulations. I think that's unlikely, because even though we're providing 92 new spaces of parking here, I think the planning and zoning may have difficulty with that density, so that's as high. These buildings shown are 4. I think probably 3 floors are more likely, but ultimately that's up to the individual property owners and what they can negotiate or what they can get approved by planning and zoning. So what the grant allows us to do is basically the site work, is to make this hillside ready for redevelopment, to make it more cost-effective for a developer to come in and get the job done. So this is the Main Street side here, as you can see. There it is. This is looking in from the Chestnut Street side. So this is Chestnut going up the hill here, and this is where the entrance would be. So there would be the first left off of Chestnut as you come in from Main, or as you go down the hill, it would be the last right. These buildings, again, are 4 stories total, 3 stories on the backside. These are a concept only. It's up to the individual property owners to decide what type of building, what size of building they're going to construct there. And they also are subject to planning and zoning, including our new Main Street overlay regulations. There's also the existing buildings now. So the location of this one now that's owned by Mr. Brill at Brill Real Estate. He may choose to do nothing with that. He may say the building that I have there now, which is, I think it's fully tenanted, is fine, and I'm going to keep that, and that's his prerogative. He's a private owner. So this is just showing what could be based on the groundwork that we lay. I want to make it clear that to redevelop this property in this manner is not something that just sort of came up from this current administration. This is something that came out of our transit-oriented development planning, going way back to, well, it was about, I think 2012 is when the TOD study came out, but we had done a Main Street study even before that. And you see this area here is recommended using the area between Main and Chestnut for parking. Uh-oh, might be losing the battery. And the redevelopment or reconstruction of properties on both sides. So this is a concept, and you'll see the project that we're talking about is basically implementing this concept. This is the plan. This is one version of it, but you see the existing building, it's Mr. Hussein's. This was where the old post office and John Shoe Repair, and that's been torn down. This is Mr. Barill's building. And you notice see these lines here, those are the slope lines. And the parking area would be here on both sides. As I said, 92 spaces are currently shown. Originally where this line is, this back property line, the original plan was to do a retaining wall, pretty high retaining wall there, and let the property go right up to the retaining wall and keep it relatively level. The problem we discovered is that we knew the soil conditions were bad, but we didn't really know how bad. This dense clay requires a type of retaining wall with piers and geo-piers, they call them, and all sorts of things. The cost of that retaining wall took us well over the $1.8 million to do this site work with the property acquisitions and all the other expenses. And so we were kind of stuck. So we went and explored many different options. We spent years. The town engineer is here somewhere. I appreciate all his help and advice. We consulted with other engineers. We consulted with geotechnical advisors and planners. And in the end, we came up with the idea that if this property was sloped backwards, instead of just stuck behind a retaining wall, then we could eliminate the need for the retaining wall. So the trade-off for that is that instead of having to acquire property up to there, we had to acquire more property. And as you can see, these are the properties that are impacted. This property is 39 Chestnut, the town already owns. This property is 41 Chestnut, which is privately owned, and there is on the back corner a little impact. This is 43 Chestnut, which is the subject matter, one of the subject matters of tonight's meeting, and a good portion of the back property is impacted by the slope. And this is 45 Chestnut, and you can see the slope basically goes right through the middle of the house. So in order to complete this plan, we need to acquire these two properties. This property, unless we can find another way to handle it, such as moving it to another location, the property will be torn down. And I will be honest with you, of all the different things we're gonna discuss tonight, the hardest thing for me is the fact that we may have no alternative but to raise that property. Because I happen to think it's a very attractive property, and I know that the family lives there, shares my opinion. Matter of fact, when we started these negotiations, they had 0 kids, and now that they have 2 children. So that is, we need to acquire this property and this property, which is the subject of tonight. This is 43 Chestnut. So what we did is, if you think of a normal real estate transaction, you have a seller who's interested in selling their property because they have something else they want to do with that money. And you have a buyer that's interested in buying a property. They come together, and that generally tends to control price. But in this situation, you have the town that needs property from 2 property owners that had no interest in selling. That wasn't on their agenda. So from a point of view of negotiation and leverage in negotiation, the town is always at a disadvantage because they're asking for something that the other property owner has no intention or had no intention of doing. Now, there is eminent domain came about because of that situation. It gave towns a little more leverage. If they needed something, they could, by the use of the eminent domain, they could take the property and pay fair compensation. In my personal opinion, that should always be the last resort because it frequently ends in, or leads to litigation, and secondly, it leads to very bad feelings about the people whose property you just took. So in light of that, when we started these negotiations, we very consciously said we need to make this a good deal for the property owners involved. And how I define good deal, and basically where I started the negotiations, so we're going to take the appraised value of the property, and we're going to add 20%, and that's what my offer is going to be. So that I think is a generous approach, but I also think if it worked, which it has, then it buys us the security of not having to resort to eminent domain and not having the risk of litigation. So the appraised value of 43 Chestnut was $103,400. That was we just did our revaluation in October 1 of last year, 2018. So this was the appraised value by our assessor as of that date. So if you the multiplier of 20%, it came out to 103 or 124 and change. In negotiations, we said, all right, we'll just do a nice round 125. One other aspect that we did have in our negotiations is the fact that even though none of this is town money, okay, so there's no taxpayer money being involved, this is all grant money, we still had to make sure that whatever we agreed to would pass muster with the state. The state has to okay all this. So in negotiations, I could always say, if I thought the ask was a bit too high, I could always say, look, even if I'd like to pay you that, we have to have a number that's acceptable to the state. So we did have that, leverage, if you will, in the negotiation. The homeowner of this property is currently vacant. They've agreed to this price, and they signed a contract for the transfer. And again, that 125 would be paid by the state of Connecticut from grant funds. The second one is 45 Chestnut. The couple that owns that now purchased the property in 2012 for $212,000. The appraised value when we started this was based on the 2013 evaluation, and it was $184,400. In 2018, the one just completed, the appraised value was $177,100. The owner at that point said, we don't think those numbers are good, we don't think what you have it assessed for. You rarely hear a taxpayer say this, by the way, that it's too low. But in this case, that was their claim, and so we agreed to do a private appraisal. And that came in at $220,000, a star quality appraisal appointed. I do want to mention that this time, that the appraiser is, if he's not here already, has agreed to come by and ask and address the audience if there's feels the need to do.
I'm here.
Ryan is here, thank you. He had basketball before, I understand, so. Now, something that I noticed in preparation for today is that there was a significant variance between the square footage in what the Windsor Locks assessor had in the first two and what the appraiser found when he did a physical inspection. That's why you have appraisals sometimes. But in 2013, we had it listed as 2,353 square feet of living area. In 2018, for some reason, that number went down to 2,166 livable area. But when they did the actual physical inspection and walked the property and measured the rooms, there's 2,541 square feet of livable area. So that might explain for some of the variance between this number and the two priors. I noticed that in both our assessments, our town assessments, it listed the property as two floors of livable space. But the property is in fact 3 floors because it has a fully finished third floor. So that may be one thing that explains the variance. So based on the 220, we applied the 20% inflator, and that brought us to 264. And the homeowners, I think somewhat reluctantly, but the homeowners have agreed to sell to the town of Windsor Locks at that price. Again, the price paid for by the grant, not the taxpayers of the town of Windsor Locks. So what I'm urging us is reminding everyone that this is not town funds that we're talking about, that this is we need these acquisitions as a way to move forward with this grant, and then I'm hopeful that people understand that this is one step in a process. We'll be back because there's other acquisitions that need to still take place, but at this point, this is one step in moving the process forward. And I urge everyone to approve it tonight. This is not a financial decision. We're not here to approve a price. We're here just to approve because the charter requires that for the town to sell or acquire real estate, it must be approved by a town meeting. There's no financial aspect, so we're not here because we're here to approve a financial aspect of the transaction. That's not required by our charter because it's not our money being used. So I hope everyone will vote in favor tonight and we can move this process forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Somehow I think this kind of morphed into a public hearing there along the way there. With that said, I'm going to open up the floor to discussion right now. Mr. Bracken, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I have several questions. The first one is that you talked about that this plan or these.
Can I interrupt you just for 1 second?
Michael Bracken.
No, I have something I wanted to say.
Okay.
I got a feeling that this is going to go into a lot of questions, and so what I would like to do, if it's okay with the rest of the world and the Board of Selectmen and the town clerk, I would like to recess this town meeting for 30 minutes or so we can open it up to that kind of a discussion and a back and forth, because I can't allow it to go through asking him questions and back and forth that way. So I am going to recess the meeting at 7:50 p.m. Now, go ahead, Mr. Bracken.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator, for the record, Attorney Carl Andolina, what would be the basis of you doing that and continuing on in the scheme? I understand your.
Okay, well, because.
I don't need to know your thinking, I know what you're trying to achieve, but under, this is not a public hearing, this is a town meeting, what would be your basis in determining that it's appropriate to do that?
Well,
I'm not saying it's not, it's.
You gonna let me finish?
Yep,
Thanks. You're done now?
I'm done now.
Okay, thank you.
Well, for the time being.
For the time being.
that offer basically because I've had to shut down people in their discussion at town meetings. Because a town meeting is different than a public hearing. A town meeting has to be a discussion of what's before us. Shall we or shall we not approve this resolution? Town meeting really doesn't get into what the nuts and bolts are that went into the whole process that got us here. So I'm just trying to give the people of Windsor Locks a chance to exercise their constitutional rights. Mr. Landolina, if you think I shouldn't be doing that, tell me right now.
Well, my problem is that the discussion, whatever is gonna take place while you're in recess is not part of the record.
So,
I have a problem with that.
okay,
So my advice is that you not do that, not recess the meeting for that purpose. And,
okay, I will have a regular town meeting and everybody's gonna have to play by the rules.
Robert's rules of order.
Yes, Robert's rules
Yeah.
of order, yes.
So you make a point that the record only has to report who voted how, that's what they said.
I understand that. Most of the minutes and most of our meetings here are, in Windsor Locks, aren't really accurate, because Robert's Rules only requires that the meeting minutes reflect who voted for what the motions were, not what the discussion was about the motion. So whatever you're gonna be discussing here tonight, it's not gonna be part of the record. It'll be,
be that as it may,
Doesn't have,
Can't we just
doesn't have to be,
motion
so
to talk?
the point is,
no,
under recess allows for discussion.
mhm. My job is to give you my advice, you're running the meeting, you can do what you want. I'm not telling you not what to do, I'm just giving you my advice.
yes, you are, Carl.
Why don't you ask for a motion to recess?
I could ask for a motion to recess, and that would be allowable, correct?
Yes,
So is there a motion to recess so we can discuss it?
Move to recess the town meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Now we can talk. Mr. Brackett?
You turned around and you said that this proposal was brought to the town by the selectmen, which technically isn't true, because Selectman Rochelle didn't bring this to the town. You and Michelle Hill did, is that correct?
I did not say this proposal was brought to the town by the selectmen.
Well, there's gotta be over 100 people here that heard you say that this proposal was brought to the town by the selectmen.
If you heard it that way, or I said it that way, I
Well,
apologize.
fine.
But
The
I did
next
not
thing
say that.
is that last Tuesday, you were asked to have another appraisal done on their properties, and you agreed to do so. And now all of a sudden, you decided that you're not gonna do that.
I attempted to find an appraiser that could get a new appraisal done by tonight, was unsuccessful.
You had a week.
So I asked for the person who had done the appraisal to come be present if there was any questions for that appraiser. I also, in thinking about it, there's really, an additional appraisal doesn't do us any good, it doesn't get us any closer, because we're not here to talk about, or to vote on the money. We're here to determine whether or not we should make this transfer, and the state is the one that determines whether the money is appropriate or not.
You turned around and you said that the appraisal on number 45 is defective because two of the town's appraisals are two different square footages. You said that Star's appraisal is the correct one. And a third appraisal would have told us if there was a defect in the appraisal. So therefore, a third appraisal would have been a confirming appraisal to tell us whether or not there was a mistake that was made by a town employee during that appraisal. Is that, or is that not a fact? It would have either confirmed the town's appraisal, or it would have confirmed Star's appraisal.
Or it could have been a different number.
You're
or
right,
it
which
could
would
have-
have told us that they were all wrong.
That's right, and then to me, the question is, so what? Nothing happens as a
Exactly,
result.
because on
Nothing
Tuesday
changes
of
as a
last
result.
week, you told us that, who cares how much I paid for that house, because it's not our money. Which sort of upset the other selectmen, because they said it is our money, it's
Right.
tax money.
I understand your point.
And then, after offering $264,000, I don't know if that was offered by you alone, or was it offered by you and Michelle Hill, because nobody explained to anybody who it was that made these offers, because the townspeople had no say in the matter. We understand, after a post that you made, that you gave an additional $40,000 for temporary housing, making that total $304,000. So who gave you the authority to give that $40,000 more?
You did,
I did?
yeah. The town meeting did. At the time, they authorized me to negotiate and implement the terms of this grant.
Then why didn't the Bushnicks get $40,000 more?
We didn't need their property.
You bought their property, didn't you? What about the other property that you bought for $125,000? Why didn't they get $40,000 more? Is it because the person that owns 45 is a staunch supporter of yours? And he's a politician and he sits on the board?
Is the 3 minutes up yet?
43 is unoccupied, so there was no reason to consider that, because there was no one to relocate. 41, not subject, it was the Bushnick's property, not subject to tonight's hearing. We did enter into negotiations for the purchase of that at one point, and we made the exact same offer to them as we did to the other two, 20% above the appraised price. They also objected to the town's assessed price, and we hired an appraiser, the same appraiser, to appraise that property, and it came in about $1,000 higher.
Thank you, Mr. Kervick.
Thank
Even though this is not really a town meeting, I can't let everybody monopolize all the time.
The only other thing is that the papers.
You've had I'll come back to you if you want. At the end, you get a second chance to talk. Anybody else? Name and address, sir.
Mark Horn, 31 Dickerman Avenue. I have a question about this process. We have several houses that are being purchased to give us land to do stuff. Is the stuff we're supposedly going to do all approved?
The construction that would take place from this point forward is all subject to approval of our land use agencies.
Okay. I'll come back and ask another question when, might be a little longer.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Mark Whitten, 326 Reed Avenue. My understanding is the appraisal of the house was not open for the inspector to go in and look at. I don't know how he measured the rooms or found out if the house was up to par with a price of that quality in that area of town.
That's incorrect. The appraiser had full access to the house. You're thinking of 41.
That's not what you said at the selectmen.
No, 41 was not, access was not permitted. That's not the subject of tonight, but the owners of that chose not to let the appraiser.
20% above, you're gonna give them an additional $40,000.
Yeah, there was a separate agreement to cover the relocation expenses of this family, who, as you recall, has no interest in selling this property, or had no interest in selling this property, has 2 young children, and has to find a new place to live because the town needs their property. So again, we negotiated, and we ultimately settled on the price of $40,000, subject to the approval of the state of Connecticut, and the state of Connecticut reviewed and approved that price.
So they're getting $300 and something thousand for property on Chestnut Street. Please buy mine. Okay, that is gross and above what is called for. The state money was for us to prudently go through to make sure that we spent properly. Yeah, the state looked at it, they rubber stamped it. They relied on the town of Windsor to do due diligence to make sure that the house was properly paid for fair, equitable value. So I suggest we go to eminent domain, they get $189,000 and they don't get all this money, which the money that you're trying to spend goes into contingency fund for any overruns for doing that development. I just think it's absurd.
Thank you. I saw you first, sir, and then you're next. Go ahead, sir.
Could you talk to me a
Your
little bit
name and address?
Art Salon Orthon, 16 Maple Ave. I live very close to the subject property.
Could you talk to me about the need to acquire these additional parcels to make I think it's 252 Main Street a usable parcel,
Right, as you,
a developable parcel, let me just rephrase.
because you live by, you're probably fairly familiar, and I think most people in town are familiar with those sites. It's an unusual piece because of the hill. There's broken and caving in retaining walls, all insufficient for the job that they're doing, that are there, and there's also no parking other than what we can provide on the street. So when we put together this grant application, the whole idea was for the town, using funds that we were hoped to receive from the state, to provide site improvements to the property that would make it much more likely that these properties could be redeveloped. That include the addition, stabilizing the hill, and the addition of parking. As a result of the plan and the changes of plans and the revisions of plans, we're now up to a lot behind that provides 92 parking spaces that essentially makes the property redevelopable by building more than one floor. And so it was essential, and I don't think that it was likely that the properties would be redeveloped without this assistance from the state, and we're thrilled to have it.
And then, just to follow up, the second part of my question, could you talk a little bit about the history of the neighboring property? You know, is it in foreclosure, was it in disrepair, the old plaza that was demolished? I just want to look at it from a perspective of a homeowner who's close, and, you know, what am I getting, or what would I would have received had we not pursued this process and made this property something that we can appreciate?
It's a long story, and but the central building was environmentally impacted. One of the classic stories, when you remove the oil tank, but you forget to tell the oil company, and they fill your cellar full of oil on their regular, because they were signed up for autofill. So we had a major problem there that had not been remediated, and with the current owner, who was in the process of in the position of mortgagor on the property, or mortgagee, they began a foreclosure process, and in the course of that, we negotiated for the forgiveness of some taxes for them to pick up all the environmental liability. And they had, to quite an expense of theirs, they cleaned up all the environmental contamination. They got a certification from DEP that it was completely properly, and then they tore the building down. They're also subject to an agreement that within 1 year of the town completing this project, that they will pull a building permit for the redevelopment of the property. So that was the major one. The one on the 254, I think we kind of all know that one. It's in one building that I don't think will really can be redeveloped. Ultimately, that's an owner's decision, subject to planning and zoning. And then there's Mr. Brill's property, which is in pretty good shape and is fully tenanted. And I think I really leave it to his good discretion whether he chooses to leave it as is, add on to it, or fully redevelop it. That's his call.
Sir, your next name and address?
Yeah, Philippe Pereira, 275 Elm Street. I know we're not supposed to be getting too far into the nuts and bolts of the conversation here, but just for the sake of comparing apples to apples, my understanding is that the assessed value of a property is usually 70% to 75% of the market rate. So, you know, when we look at the assessed value of, I don't know, 175, 180, whatever it was, and you factor in an additional 30%, that's usually the market rate. And I'm not a licensed appraiser, but I am a licensed real estate agent. So when I'm looking at that, I don't know if the numbers seem as far as some people have concerns about. So, you know, really, I don't think you're throwing on as much as it may look like it is on the presentation. I just want to make sure, like I said, where the assessed numbers versus an appraised number, there is a difference. And
I will interrupt to just say that the numbers that we displayed today were all 100% value, not reduced by the 30%.
Okay.
So that's all, it's all the assessment determination of value. Different approaches used in the appraisals, but, you know, the cost approach versus market approach, but they were, the numbers that I put up were all 100%.
Okay, so they're apples to apples.
Hold on a sec. Sir, you were next.
My name is Don Dubuque. I live on 45 Cypress Road. I am a retired federal audit supervisor with the Department of Defense, and with 35 years' experience in auditing, 5 years of which was auditing state grants, I would advise you right now to stop saying this is not taxpayer money. This is taxpayer money. The problem is, the state is not taxpayer money, but it is taxpayer money.
If I was trying to be careful to make sure I was saying this is not Windsor Locks, municipal taxpayer money that's been paid, that's come through the Windsor Lock system. Clearly, it is taxpayer money, because all of us as taxpayers in the state of Connecticut, this comes from that source. So if it was not clear about that, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, and one thing I gotta say, your 20% adjustment, and then you need to do a little bit more than just to arbitrarily come up with a 20% figure. First of all, you probably should have talked to the state. What would the state think would be an equitable price? You should have talked to other towns and asked them, when they've experienced that type of situation, what kind of adjustment do they award the homeowner? You're setting a very dangerous precedent when you start arbitrarily giving away money. And first of all, when you're saying it's not, don't worry about it, Windsor Locks, it's not your money. It is partially your money anyway. Your money goes into the state money. But you gotta be very careful when you set these precedents of arbitrarily giving 20% above, because the next time down the road, let's say you're gonna buy 20 properties, and everybody says, well, let's look back in 2019, you gave them 20% over the appraised value. And I heard another gentleman say, why didn't you do a second appraisal? The normal course of events in a federal review is, if you have a disagreement with the homeowner on the appraisal, you would have at least 2 more independent appraisals performed, and you would just settle on the average.
So,
and that's how you would address it. And therefore, nobody would have an argument with you after the fact. Everything is above board, and nothing was just decided in a backdoor meeting. So, again, as a federal auditor who audited 5 years of federal grants literally from coast to coast, state grant money is kind of handled in a very lackadaisical way, and you're constantly setting yourself up for second guessing. So I'm just trying to point out.
Thank you. I did contact the grant administrators before getting into these negotiations, explain my reluctance to go the eminent domain route, and so that means we're going to probably pay more than or more than assessed value or appraised value for the property. What do you think a reasonable range would be? They were somewhat elusive, but I said if we started at 10%, would that work? If we started at 20%, and they indicated that if they didn't exceed 20%, it was likely they would probably go along with it, given the urgency of sort of having it adjust in midstream because of the engineering issues that we faced.
Well, I would hope you documented your discussion with them, and I would hope you understand now, you have set a precedent for the future.
Thank you.
If this is the path you're willing to follow, I hope all your taxpayers are on board with this too, because.
Well, I hope we get so many more grants that we have to face this situation
Well,
again. That would be awesome if we
I
did.
would hope you get as many grants as you can to help the town.
Good.
I mean, that's the way I look at it.
We're on the same page there.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
I gotta go everybody else one more time.
Didn't know if there was gonna be
You were first,
anybody
you're
else.
next.
Gary Dowling, 24 Grace Street, I'd like to make a motion to vote.
That's the one thing you can't do at a public hearing. This was a town meeting, I'd have to accept that. Gonna recess, excuse me. You're next.
Lisa Lambert, 11 Copper Drive. In the event that we did have to execute eminent domain, how is that paid for? Because there's a steep cost to eminent domain.
If we went down that route, basically we would get an appraisal, and then the appraisal would be done, and we would take the property at that point, based on that number. But the people whose property were taken would have a right to bring the matter to court, to have the number reviewed by the court. So we would own it, but subject to this legal right for them to challenge.
Would the town incur expenses?
Oh,
And how would that be paid for? Out of grant money or out of our?
Expenses to defend eminent domain was not, all these items are specifically itemized in our grant application. That was not one that was contemplated. So that would come from the taxpayers of the town of Windsor.
Yes, sir. Then you.
Russ Salt, 76 Oakridge Drive. My question is about the owners of these other properties. What kind of assurance do we have from them that they're going to build the kinds of buildings that you displayed on the screen up there?
We have no assurance that they're going to redevelop at all, but for the agreement with the owner of the middle property, that they will apply for a zoning permit within a year of us finishing this project. We do have assurances that what they will build will be compliant with what we're expecting, because not only do we have our regular zoning regulations, but a couple of years ago, our foresighted Planning and Zoning Commission adopted a Main Street overlay zone, which has very specific architectural standards as to what can happen in the property. It also is subject to a reasonableness standard regarding parking, side yard, those types of things. But architecturally, they're there, and I'd urge you to take a look at our zoning regulations and review that Main Street overlay zone, because there's a relatively narrow window of what can be constructed within there. And so we hope that they file applications and that they at some point redevelop.
Well, what if they just decide they don't want to spend that kind of money to build these, that they don't think they're going to?
Well, then at least we have a site that looks a heck of a lot better than it does now.
Yes.
Tiffany Tisler, 94 South Elm Street. First, I'm wondering how many additional properties you expect to be acquired in this process to redevelop downtown?
So the only two that I can think of offhand, rather than going back to that, the first house, as you go up, if you're coming up from Maine, it's an abandoned yellow house. That's where the access is going to be. We are working with 47, thank you. We're working with the owner of that property and actually have agreed to, in principle, a trade of other properties that we're acquiring for that property, so there'll be no additional cost. And then there's a little piece in the back of the Bushnick property, a little corner that we don't need to acquire, but we need to we need to acquire some grading rights on that property, and we're still negotiating that. I hope we're still negotiating that.
I have a
Yes, you follow up.
How much of Windsor Locks tax revenue do you expect to lose through the town acquisition of these properties?
I really don't think, I think we'll gain, because once we do these improvements, even though we'll lose tax revenue from the houses we've acquired, once we own them, we don't intend to own them forever. We intend that when this is all said and done, the town won't own any of this property. It'll all be returned to private ownership. And we think it'll increase because the value of the properties on Main Street are going to go up substantially as a result of these improvements.
Yes.
Jennifer Susi, 257 Elm Street. The additional 40,000, is that coming out of the grant money as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so with all the money that we're spending out of the grant money, do we know how much it is going to cost to build said parking lot?
Yes, we have very detailed engineering estimates of cost, expenditures, acquisition that's been provided to the state of Connecticut, and it was approved by the state of Connecticut. It's a requirement of the grant.
What, how?
I think she wants to know how much.
Yeah.
You wanted to know a number, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's
We
about
have
20
$1.8 million.
items on here. The bottom line, with escalators for contingencies and, sorry.
Does that include demolition of the houses that we're
Yes, it
repairing?
includes all that. Demos, removing of existing walls, it's just a whole laundry list. And then there's a 10% contingency and 10%,
Incidentals.
incidentals.
Contingencies are for unanticipated cost, and incidentals are for inspection and testing.
And this includes all the acquisition costs and demolition costs, and it comes out to $1,744,000, 203. Sorry, 1,744,200.
But that includes the acquisition.
That includes all the acquisitions.
That,
Yes.
that means purchasing the houses?
You gotta go around to everybody that hasn't spoken yet first. You're next to Mr. Glazier. He had his hand up before you, but I'll come to you.
Eric Marsh, South Elm Street. So these are separate votes, these two properties?
It's presented in two questions.
Okay.
So we'll have the same discussion with number two.
Okay, so I have grave concerns about one of them. I just don't However, what happens if we approve only one?
Well, we can't go forward with the current plan, so we'd have to either re-engineer it again or give the money back and just say we're done. I share your concern about, and I see you're talking about 45.
I mean, my concern is, to put my concern in more fine point, back in the 70s, some developers came in and said, we tear down all of Main Street, we'll make it nicer. It concerns me that we're doing the same thing now. Not that I don't totally favor the project, I think it's a nice looking house. I think that it's got character, it's gonna look a lot better than these buildings that you're gonna put there, or that, I know they're just drawings, but, and it really, I don't think I can vote to raise 45.
It's an excellent point, and that's why we spent almost 2 years trying to look for alternatives, including moving the house. We got quotes on the cost of moving the house to another lot nearby. Actually, some of the property that we'd be acquiring, that's why we're in negotiations with 41 as well. Ultimately, we didn't feel that we could do that without risk of going over the budget for the grant. However, we've got, I believe it's 90 days before we can close after this is approved. Is it 90? I think it's 90. So we're still looking for opportunities for that house. We may be able to sell it intact and have it moved to another lot. If that could happen, I would bend over backwards to see that happen.
That would be the responsibility of Windsor Locks.
We'd have
not
to
the
figure
current
out,
developer.
I would hopefully be the responsibility of whoever bought the house, but we'd have to negotiate that. I am actively seeking other opportunities. It would be a shame to have to remove that house, and that's the one thing that sticks in my craw, so I share your
The
concern.
reality is, that's what's gonna happen.
It definitely could happen, but I would be more than happy to welcome your help in trying to figure out other alternatives. Maybe there's something out there we haven't even thought of yet, but I'd love to save that house.
Thank you. Mr. Glazier, you're next.
Yes, Douglas Glazier, 167 Taft Lane. Now, all these renderings you got here and what's being planned, is my understanding it's all in the downtown TIF district, then. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's right. Okay. According to the TIF Downtown District Master Plan, 100% of all new taxes will go into the TIF account and nothing goes into the town revenue. Therefore, all the reconstruction that's going to take place in the downtown area, the town is not going to get any money for it. It's all going to go into the TIF account, but not into the town revenue. So why would we even want to entertain this whole project? It's going to cost the town money, because once all these sites are up and running, we're going to have to provide town services for it, and that's taxpayer money. So all I see is that we're going to have taxpayer money for the project with no revenue. I'm baffled by that.
Well, let me try and calm your nerves about that.
Yes, all right.
TIF revenue is town revenue. The TIF account is town account. It goes into our coffers, it's managed by the town, its budget is managed by, overseen by the Board of Finance, it's town revenue. It's just a different account that it goes into. So it's still our money.
Mr. Kervick, there are two separate accounts. There is the town general fund, and there is the TIF account.
That's right.
They're separate accounts, and and the TIF account is run, the proceeds on that are run by approval of the Board of Selectmen.
What's
Board of Finance.
TIF, please?
Well,
What
Board of
is
Selectmen
TIF?
with support, with report of the Board of Finance for your TIF budget.
It's just another line item in our budget, in our town budget.
But Mr. Kervick, it's not going into the general town fund, is what I'm saying.
It's still used, could be used. If there's an expenditure within the TIF district that occurs outside of the TIF district, TIF money can be used. I just think of the hydro study that was just ordered. The Board of Finance chose to take all of that money out of the TIF account. So it's still there, available for our use, just like all our other money.
That's why they made a whole nother category for it, because it's all the same as the other.
It's just a new tool.
You're next, sir.
Rob Bruner, 239 North Street. Bear with me, I might speak. I had the questions, but they were actually answered, tonight. But I just wanted for the record that, from my observations, it seems that not only was this meeting rushed, half the people in town don't know what's going on, half the seniors aren't here, and I just think it's not right. It should be done so every single person knows what the heck is going on. That's all. Thank you.
I would just point out in response to that, that the state of Connecticut has started putting pressure on us that if we don't move this grant forward, that we'll risk losing the grant. So there's a balance.
It just seems that no matter what, you're gonna do whatever you want.
That's why we're here, so that the opposite is true.
Mr. Horan, you're gonna have the last word at this part of the, oh, Mr. Russo, you're next. You the first haven't spoken yet.
William Russo, 407 Elmwood Drive. Chris, I got to take exception with you when you say that this meeting is not about the money. It's about how you arrived at the purchase price for these homes. And I think that the taxpayer has a right to query your logic. I just think you're out there doing a Charlie hustle, failing to postpone this town meeting. I also would like to know, I think the issue was raised by former Selectman Glazier, that as far as Michelle Hill assenting to hold this town meeting on December 2nd, have we got beyond that fact to find out that this is in fact a legally called town meeting?
Yes, the matter's been referred to the town attorney. The town attorney has determined that this is, the notice of this town meeting is sufficient, and has determined, and that Selectman Hill in fact signed the notice of meeting on the 21st of November while she was in office.
But it was dated December 2nd, no?
December 8th, I believe.
The administrative assistant to the Board of Selectmen dates all town meeting notices as of the date she plans to send it to the Journal Enquirer for publication. December 2nd is the date that she sent it to the Journal Enquirer for publication.
Since we do have the town attorney here, I would ask him to give his opinion.
For the record, Carl Anderson, good evening. Mr. Glazier did bring that matter to our attention last week, Doug, I think it was, at a Board of Selectmen's meeting. The purpose of any public notice is to apprise the public of the matters that are going to be taken up at the meeting so they can intelligently prepare. So in terms of the substance, I reviewed that. I think the substance of the notice is proper. I did query the first selectman about Michelle Hill's signature on it, and he informed me the date that she signed it, she still was in office. She left office on November 26th. The document was signed, I believe, on the 21st. I urged him to get an affidavit from her so that the file would, and the record would be complete, that in fact she did sign it on that date. So at the time the document was signed, it was a proper notice to be placed in the paper. I would suggest, and I did to the first selectman's office, that they date the documents when they're signed, not when they're placed in the paper. But, and I did make a query. I belong to an association called the Connecticut Municipal Attorneys Association. We have a listserv. You can throw a question out there, and within a half an hour, 30 lawyers will get back to you. I threw it out there, and I got the same response from every one of them. That concurred with my opinion. So I think it's proper. The notice is proper. I think it does what it's supposed to do, and I don't see any reason on that basis for this meeting not to go forward.
Thank you.
I
We have one first timer right over here. and then I'll come back.
wasn't done.
Oh, I didn't realize that, I'm sorry. So many hands go up and my eyes don't go through the whole.
Okay, Joe, I know you don't want me to ask the difficult questions. I again take
haven't heard one
exception. I again take exception with Selectman Kervick's statement. Well, this is only state grant money. With the state of affairs that our state is in, that's rather a cavalier kind of attitude to push this project forward. That's our money. And again, to vote on the approval of this property, the mechanism on how you arrived at that has to be scrutinized.
I'm sure the state of Connecticut very much appreciates your working on their behalf.
Well, I'm gonna call them, I'm
Excuse
gonna
me.
complain to them.
I have the floor. I certainly very much appreciate it, but the fact of the matter is, if this grant money is not expended, it's not going back into the state coffers, it's going to some other town. And I'm sick and tired of being the town that doesn't get the money. It's time we fight for Windsor Locks and get the money that we deserve. So I'm more than proud that we worked our tails off to secure this grant for the town of Windsor Locks.
Me too, if you'd be up front.
I'm gonna do Lucinda and then you.
Thank you.
Cindy Van Houston, 70 Grove Street. The money that our townspeople are getting, is that a check that's written by the state of Connecticut, or do we pay it, get reimbursed?
This is a reimbursement style grant.
Okay, so we pay it and we will get reimbursed by the state. And since it's the Christmas season, why can't we give everybody the same benefits, the moving benefits? Since, you know, it's not our money.
Thank you.
If the action of the town of Windsor Locks forced you out of your home, then I would feel obligated to take you up on your offer.
But there's more than one person that's being forced out of there. All I'm asking, Chris, is if we're offering moving expenses for one, shouldn't we offer it for others?
There's only one.
Okay, I just wondered.
Ron King, 461 North Street. I'd just like a clarification of the comments that were made about the TIF grants and how they're utilized in the town. If a town department receives excess costs because of properties within the TIF fund, are they eligible to be reimbursed for those costs?
Yes.
Thank you.
This gentleman over here hasn't spoken yet.
Well, I kind of think I've already kind of
Okay,
put my opinion down, but basically,
Mr. Rand was.
if you're kicking someone out of their home, at least in my opinion, I kind of see this as, this is a good expenditure. I mean, I know if someone was saying, I have to leave where I live, I'd want a little extra money as well.
40,000.
Okay, we have a new, Mrs. Kerr.
Michelle Kervick, 100 Pearl Drive. I'd like to make a motion to bring this back to a town meeting, please.
A motion is not in order at this public hearing, but I do agree with you. I do think that this has gone on for quite a while. We will come back to the town meeting, and during that period of time, there will be a period of discussion. We're gonna go right back to discussion. Okay? This isn't, you're not being cut off. We're just doing it a different way without the back and forth and constant talking. Okay? So with that, I will reconvene this meeting at 8:30.